It's the 19th of November 2022. The Glendenning family are waiting at Edinburgh Airport. Brian is finally on his way back home from Iraq, where he'd been imprisoned on an Interpol Red Notice.
We're at the end day, and I'm calling it the end day. It's the location right now, we're in Edinburgh Airport, and we're here because my brother Brian Glendenning should be touching on the runway as we speak, and I'm not alone today. I've not been alone all the way through this, we've always been together, but I've been waiting for this day for 10 weeks. 10 weeks of not knowing, 10 weeks of convincing everybody else it's going to be okay, when inside you were falling apart as well. So it's just everybody's emotions, nervous, anxiety, but nervous anxiety in a good way. Not nervous anxiety that Brian's going to Qatar jail anymore. Nervous anxiety that just we're going to see someone we've longed to see for so long. It feels a lot longer than 10 weeks.
Brian's wife Kimberly was able to speak to him briefly after he was released.
Just can't wait to get home, to be honest, and get him home and just try and put this behind us, really, and move on with our life. But he's just anxious about everything. He's worried, but he'll be fine as soon as he's home. You all right there?
Oh, I'm shaking.
Where's your lid?
Oh dear. It's just, we're here. We're here. He's coming through the door, so we're going to get a hold of him. And I hate Interpol. They stole my boy. They kidnapped my boy and they held him at ransom. That needs to be stopped. That needs to be stopped. But today's a happy day. This is happy tears. I'm fine.
It's an anxious wait.
It's saying on the board that his plane's arrived, so I tried ringing him 5 minutes ago and it wasn't ringing, but I've just tried now twice and it's just rang out, so it means he's arrived. It's the dialing tone, like the UK dialing tone, the one I like to hear, so maybe phone me back just now or hopefully just collect his luggage.
Get on in, people the first. Cases will be the last to come through.
Oh my God.
He's not feeling well.
Where's your bag? Where's my bag?
I'm Sahar Zand, and this is Dirty Work. This episode, the lasting impact of a wrongful Interpol notice. Brian Glendenning spent 10 weeks in grim conditions in a dangerous prison in Iraq. All because the Qatari National Bank was pursuing him for the last £4,000 of a loan. It never would have seen him locked up in the UK or many other places around the world. The family had to settle with the bank in Qatar to get him out of prison in Iraq. They liken it to a ransom and his detention to a kidnapping. Brian's case poses an interesting question. Should the notice system be used to pursue people for this kind of thing? Brian wasn't up for talking when he first got back. It's taken a couple of months, but he's finally ready.
Hello.
Hi guys.
Oh my God.
Good. Hiya. How are you?
Good.
Good. Hi, how you doing?
I'm sitting in his parents' living room, where I first met his family all those months ago.
To see you so happy. Last time I saw you, it's like you were just not this person.
Here. I wasn't here.
No, you weren't here.
I can still cry looking at you.
It's obvious that Brian is burnt out, and he appears
last
dazed.
Time you said next time I see you, things would be different.
And it is.
Yeah.
Clearly, he's still got a lot to process. A quick warning, he does swear a bit and mentions suicidal thoughts. He tells me about the first time he was taken to the prison in Baghdad.
We went in 2 sliding bar gates, if you like, close the one behind you, lock that. I remember looking through the bars and seeing it was one It was a bland, concrete, dirty, smelly box. Unhealthy looking, unwashed human beings that weren't getting treated like human beings, and there was a lot of people just lying on the floor sleeping. I says, Kimberly, I can't go in here. It's murderers, rapists, terrorists. I shouldn't be in here with these type of people, for what I'd done. And I walked in, and a few of them obviously woken up and looking, and as I walked onto the floor, they went nuts. When I went saying nuts, they were up in my face shouting and screaming. I don't know what they were screaming. They could have been saying, I'm going to kill you. They could have been saying, I want to be your best friend. I thought I was going to pass out. Started shaking and like hyperventilating a bit and panicking, and Hassan, at the time I never knew who Hassan was, but he could speak quite good English, Lebanese lad. He says, come sit. So I was like a bullet. I went straight over and sat. He was there for the exact same reason.
Like Brian, Hussein was also detained due to what he believed to be a wrongful Interpol Red Notice. But they weren't the only ones. Brian later found out that there were 5 others in his cell for exactly the same reason.
He told me he was on to his 11th month in this room. And I just thought, shit. I says, have you been to court? No. And I just thought, no.
What was going through your mind at that moment?
I'm fucked. I'm going to be the same. Once you're in there, there's no voice, there's nobody listening, you don't have a voice. You're a nobody, you're a nothing, eh? But it's like, but it's a foreign language, 24/7. Lights, bright lights, never went out, never went off once. There's a fan spinning. And everybody's just chain smoking in this wee small area, and it was just horrendous.
What was the hardest point, lowest point for you during this whole time?
The unknown was very difficult. It was just like they put me in this horrible cell and just shut the door, and you ended up just having to numb your mind, I suppose, and say, right, I need to deal with surviving in here and hope that the rest of the stuff on the outside, somebody does something, because I had to put all my energy into just getting through each day, and it was horrible. But there was times that you're in deep dark places, and it did cross your mind, you're like, I wonder what would have happened if I could have got a hold of, I don't know, a bit of rope or anything, I don't know. But in my head I says, that's like a killer's way type thing, but there's times I think, how much more can you take of this? First time I've really spoke about it. So I'm saying things here that I've not even told my wife and my parents, I feel like just so strange like this. Even this morning coming up, I don't want to do this, it's just like,
I'm so sorry, I know.
No, it's fine. That needs done. To be honest, it needs to be spoken about, because the way they treat people is it's fucking wrong,
Who do you blame for everything that you went through? For putting you in that position?
I blame the banks, because I feel like they've trapped me, They're abusing Interpol and using it to their own greed. I blame Interpol. The way that Interpol's ran in those countries is... I never knew anything about Interpol really until I landed in Basra, and that's wrong. That is so wrong, like, got nothing. And I'm starting from scratch again,
How much money do you think you lost during this whole process?
Me personally, I don't know, but as a family, I wouldn't like to put a figure on it, but it would be for something that was only 3 or 4 grand, we're probably about nearly £100,000,
Have you been compensated for any of
Not
this?
a penny.
For the Glendennings, they feel it's still too soon to count the costs of Brian's Red Notice. Their story as a family, in many ways, is just beginning. We reached out to the government of Qatar and Iraq for comment, but they haven't responded. Interpol has declined to comment on the specifics of Brian's case. His is a difficult story to hear, but Brian did eventually make it home. And he does have a supportive family who are grateful for the work of advocate Rada Sterling, who you heard from in the last episode. Brian also holds a British passport, which probably didn't hurt either.
So there's no question that within the British Parliament we have grave concerns that Interpol is being abused, whether it be for ideological reasons, whether it be for the personal interests of important individuals within certain countries, whether it be to silence voices, or whether it be for the domestic interests of hostile regimes. And my concern is that it's essentially becoming a tool of transnational repression.
This is Alicia Kearns, a Conservative MP and chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, which held a hearing on Interpol in 2021.
No one should be being able to be pursued because of something that is not a transnational major crime. I'm not sure that overdue bank debts constitute that level of focus.
So, do you believe that Brian's case demonstrates an abuse of Interpol's notice system by Qatar?
I think sadly it does look from what I've seen that it is, and the problem is that because Interpol sits so far out of the British system, because it is independent and international, it is a lot harder to get justice. And that's why back in 2021 I asked the Foreign Affairs Committee to do a hearing specifically on Interpol, which we did do.
And what came out of that hearing?
So there are two kind of buckets where I think we need major reform of Interpol. So the first is the organisation itself. So they don't currently publish the criteria on which red notices are based. That needs to change. We need to see what the criteria is, and we need to make sure that there's a high evidentiary basis for every single red notice that goes through. I think we were quite frustrated that the people who gave evidence to us from the government didn't necessarily feel there was that big of a problem. I believe there needs to be a duty for the Home Office to inform British nationals if there is a malicious red notice against them. The other thing we should be looking at is whether we provide a list as the British government to Interpol of people that we are worried are being maliciously hunted down, whether it be the Chinese Communist Party or by the Russians, and we say, if you get a red notice against any of these people who are British nationals or seeking refuge in Britain, we expect you to really push against them or to ask the evidence to be provided.
You have said that Interpol should be providing evidence for the people who have these notices against them. They might argue that they do. They might argue that they have the CCF and the NDTF who check these notices, that check, evidence to make sure that these notices are legitimate.
I think Interpol can't seriously suggest that their current process is working. There are too many British nationals, let alone people from other countries. If we can sit here and name 4 British nationals off the top of our heads who have had malign red notices against them, that suggests there is a systemic problem.
Do you think that Interpol itself should be taking more responsibility?
If Interpol is going to put out an international notice that tells every member state to arrest an individual the moment they step onto their soil to be sent back to another country for justice, Interpol should be pretty damn certain of the basis on which they are doing it.
We've come to Istanbul to meet the family of Idris Hassan, a 33-year-old Uyghur activist who's been detained on a red notice in Morocco for 2 years. He used to live here. I'm walking through Istanbul's Zeytinburnu neighborhood, which is known for its large population of Uyghur residents. Many of the residents here have escaped Xinjiang from what many call a genocide against them. A lot of them are under a huge amount of pressure through threats against them or their families to return. And when that doesn't work, China has increasingly been turning to Interpol and its Red Notice system, aiming to have them arrested and extradited. His wife Zainur is still living here with their 3 children, a 9-year-old boy and his 2 sisters, who are 7 and 4. They live in a modest apartment close to the mosque and the children's school. The living room has been turned into its own kind of classroom. There are alphabet stickers on the walls and a pile of Uyghur language children's books in the corner next to the toys and a squeaky trampoline. The kids were all born in Turkey, so Zaynur is keen to make sure that they learn their own language and culture. This is something that their father Idris was also passionate about, and part of the reason he was targeted by China.
These are designed by my husband.
Wow, the graphics.
This is Abdul Karim.
And this is him. It does look like Abdul Karim.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the Chinese government has such an issue with your husband?
Because my husband is a journalist and a Uyghur activist and a designer, computer designer.
Why would that cause issues for the Chinese government?
Because his Chinese government is doing genocide to Uyghurs, and he also want to keep our mother tongue. He has done many things about Uyghur language, like alphabet cards and books for children. He has designed it.
Life in exile for Idris and Zaynur was challenging from the get-go. The Chinese government had flagged him to the Turkish authorities, who refused him residency. He was arrested and imprisoned 4 times. One of them lasted over a year. So, in an attempt to find safety, Idris decided to leave Turkey. The plan was for him to go to Europe and then have his family follow later. To do this, he first flew to Morocco. But that was the end of his journey, as he was arrested at the airport. It turns out that China had accused Idris of belonging to a terrorist group, and so requested Interpol issue a red notice for him.
I was a little bit released because he was in Morocco, not in China. And so a little bit released. I say truly, a little bit released.
Why do you think would have happened to him if he was sent back to China?
If my husband was sent to China, maybe we couldn't communicate again. I couldn't hear anything because there were some Uyghurs in other countries had sent to China. Then no one know what happened to them. So I just if something happened like this, what could I do?
Within weeks of his arrest, Interpol reviewed Idris's case and determined that it violated Interpol's own human rights rules. And so they said that his red notice was no longer valid, and they informed Morocco of this decision in writing. But it was too late. Idris was already trapped. That was more than 2 years ago, and Idris remains in a prison in Casablanca. The Moroccan courts upheld their decision to extradite him to China. And though it hasn't happened yet, Idris is still at risk. 45 human rights organizations believe that if he's sent back, Idris will be at substantial risk of arbitrary detention, torture, and serious rights violations.
My husband hasn't committed any crime, and we're living outside of China for 10 years now, but we still can live freely. And I just want my children and my husband could reunite. My children could hug their father. I just want this. Maybe it's not much. It's not much for us.
Is that your husband?
David, my husband.
Oh.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Yaxshi. Yem qo'ying.
Qancha ko'ryapsan?
Does she remember him?
Remember, but today she is angry.
Idris is allowed to call his family 3 times a week from solitary confinement. The calls are brief.
I think it's Interpol. Why take my name without any evidence? Just China's government give me my name. This man is danger. After you put on the list Interpol. I don't understand it.
Has Interpol ever offered any support or apology to you for what happened?
No, Interpol doesn't do nothing for me. I am every day worried about, because if Moroccan government send me to China, this equal to death for me. Equal to death. Maybe I am forever in the prison. I cannot see my children, my family, forever maybe. I'm not here in Interpol.
Oh, the time is running.
My time is finished. I'm sorry.
How are you feeling?
Bad. I just want to cry. I just don't want to cry in front of my child.
The Chinese government didn't respond to our request for comment. The Moroccan government gave us a statement saying Morocco is operating in full compliance with its UN obligations and extradition treaty arrangements with the People's Republic of China. Interpol has again declined to comment on the specifics of Idris's case.
The thing is that a lot of really repressive countries use Interpol as a sort of laundering mechanism.
Ben Keith and Rhys Davies, the lawyers specializing in Interpol Red Notices, who we heard from in the last episode, say that it's pretty obvious which countries are the most frequent abusers of Interpol's notice system.
China is extremely sophisticated. I mean, there's PR campaigns, there's TV programs, there's academic papers about how China's cracking down on corruption. And in the melee of examining all these corrupt criminals, it's very easy to slip through a whole body of individuals who you're targeting because of their political views. Our experience again of China is actually, it's not so much political, it's ideological. So it's Uyghur Muslims, it's successful business people. They don't really care about Interpol. Interpol's just one of their tools.
What you will see is that China will request a red notice, but they already know where the person is. So the question is, well, why a red notice? Why not just have them extradited?
And what China do with the red notice is that they don't really care whether they get extradited, because they put the red notice out there, which means you can't travel. So they'll get the red notice, they fix your location, a police officer will get your number or turn up by hacking or by whatever method, will turn up at your door and say, we have your grandmother or your aunt or your uncle or your brother or sister in custody in Beijing.
Or we've taken their house. Would you like to, if you come back to Beijing, everything is going to be okay. And that's what they do. And we've seen this. We've seen taped phone calls. They're not bothered about the extradition. They're just using it as you can't move anywhere.
As Ben and Rhys are talking, I recall something that Rada Sterling told me. Sometimes the red notice is the punishment. We did put these allegations to China, but haven't received a response.
We haven't even talked about diffusions and the lost and stolen passport system.
Ben is talking about a loophole, Interpol's lost and stolen passport system. This is where Interpol tracks cancelled passports and makes information about that person available to member countries, just like they do with red notices. So if your passport is flagged, you'll likely get stopped at an international border. So
you circumvent not only the red notice process, but the whole extradition process entirely, because you're not accusing anybody of a criminal offence at all. You're just saying, oh, you crossed a border and your passport's invalid. And so, terribly sorry, we're going to deport you. We have to deport you back to your country, the only country that you can go to, which is obviously your country of origin. You're arrested on your return. There's no protection from the extradition law or international law in that respect. And so it's basically open season. And so we know Turkey have issued thousands of these.
Turkey is one of the few countries that we know has been sanctioned by Interpol for abusing its systems. We reached out to Turkey for a response and haven't heard back. But Turkish officials have previously complained about their red notice request being denied. We've also been told by Interpol insiders that Turkey's access to the database has been restricted. But Interpol leaders themselves only reluctantly admit to taking action against member states.
We have been having a dialogue with Turkey, indeed, on a number of non-compliant cases. But Turkey is also one of the examples where we have seen definitely improvement because of the dialogue that has been taken place, the action the Secretariat has been taken, and we saw a significant improvement.
Back in Lyon at Interpol's HQ, I asked Jürgen Stock, Interpol's Secretary General, which countries are the worst abusers of the system.
We are definitely not publishing information concerning particular countries. I know that this is a request that very often arrives, that say, where is your list of the most non-compliant countries? We are not doing that in the interest of international police cooperation.
Isn't transparency a part of deterrence? If you're not saying, Russia, China, Turkey, they are the big common abusers of our system, of our rules, what incentive do they have not to abuse them?
Interpol's mandate is to ensure the widest possible mutual support between criminal police organizations all around the world, between countries who have very different legal systems, between countries who very often have a difficult political relation, and even between countries in conflict sometimes. So it's a sensitive work that we are doing in the interest of global security to protect people all around the world against ordinary law crime. So murderers, rapists, drug traffickers, those who are exploiting human beings.
So the system as it is, we know, I'm sure you know, that it's still ruining lives. With these so-called safeguards and with the measures that you've put in place, some notices are still getting through the net. And, I can name a few: Ahmed Ali, Idris Hassan, Brian Glendening. These are individuals whose lives have been ruined. Their families' lives have been ruined. I want to talk about a couple of them, if you don't mind.
I ask for your understanding that I cannot discuss individual cases here. What I can tell you is that the system protects lives all around the world every single day when dangerous criminals are being arrested based on an Interpol Red Notice or diffusion or any other information that goes through our databases.
So a lot of these people that I've spoken to, that you don't want to comment on individual cases, they all describe a deep sense of despair, especially for the fact that there is nobody they can go to. There is nobody that they can hold accountable. Is there anything you want to say to these people, to their families, to their children?
Again, I have been saying we have been doing everything we can within the General Secretariat to ensure a proper process, that every information that goes through Interpol is properly checked against our rules. We have a commission for the control of Interpol files that is being used as a kind of appeals body.
But then you also said that mistakes happen.
Quite
in the cases where mistakes
intensively.
happened, is there anything you want to say to them?
I mean, I and we regret any case of a publication of a non-compliant notice.
How do you hold countries that are non-compliant accountable?
I mean, we have a number of measures according to our rules on the processing, so-called supervisory or even corrective measures, which can even have the consequence that a member country is completely disconnected from our tools and services. We have currently 4 or 5 countries where we have this dialogue on providing support or corrective measures to ensure that the information, again, meets our quality standards. But our role is not kind of to police what member countries are doing on a national level. That is not our role. We have to respect their sovereign decisions. But if they request Interpol to take action, then we have to ensure compliance. So that's our role, but we are not going beyond that kind of red line. Thank you very much.
There is something a bit absurd about Interpol's line on this. Because the activists, advocates and lawyers who represent clients in these desperate situations know who these countries are. That China, Turkey and Russia are amongst those that come up all the time. Which makes it harder to understand why Interpol gives cover to the offending countries to act with impunity. Take Bahrain, for example. The country cracked down violently on protesters during the Arab Spring. It used a range of repressive laws to label its political opponents as terrorists. Activists fled, spreading out all over the world. Many of them who live in exile still live in fear.
Firstly is I was aware of the state's attempt to hack my mobile phone through Pegasus spyware. When the Pegasus scandal came out, over 50,000 numbers, my number was actually one of them.
This is Saeed Ahmed Al-Wada'i. He's the director of advocacy for a UK-based NGO called the Bahrain Institute for Human Rights and Democracy. He's also a Bahraini refugee based in London. Saeed has this outward gentleness that betrays the grit it takes to do the work he does. But it's written on his face. There is a large sickle-shaped scar in the middle of his forehead. He says that the police kicked him in the head during a protest in Bahrain. Saeed campaigned for a man named Hakim Al-Arabi, a prominent footballer and a Bahraini refugee who, despite having been granted asylum in Australia, was arrested on an Interpol Red Notice on his way to his honeymoon in Thailand back in 2018. As mentioned in the last episode, it's against Interpol's rules for refugees to be subjected to red notices. To this day, Hakim remains one of the most high-profile victims of blatant Interpol abuse. He was eventually freed and returned to Australia.
Now, a Bahraini refugee who's been held in a Bangkok prison for more than 2 months is on his way back to Australia, where he's been playing as a semi-professional footballer. Hakim Al-Arabi was...
Saeed says that at the time, Hakim's story pinged around the Bahraini diaspora and that it put everyone on edge.
It's a serious, we live these nightmares. Although I left and escaped the country, however, living in London, I don't really feel very much safe.
They grew to fear red notices. Then in 2021, an Emirati security official was elected president of Interpol. The presidency is more of a figurehead position compared to the Secretary General. It has no operational control of the organization. But the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain are close allies, and Saeed feared that a high-ranking UAE official at the head of Interpol would only embolden Bahrain's misuse of the notice system to go after its dissidents.
That was a very serious threat to an individual who comes from the Gulf region, who stood up against a very abusive regime there. There is a real threat. There is a true nightmare I would think of before I have to make any move, before I travel to anywhere, is because of that Interpol Red Notice.
And his fears were justified. Despite the noise around Hakim's case, there have been more arrests.
My name is Ahmed Jaffer. I'm a prisoner in the prison now.
Stay with me. I know the sound is bad. That's because Ahmed Jaffer is sending this voice note from a prison cell in Bahrain where he's serving a life sentence.
I'm speaking to you from my isolated in the jail with a difficult situation, and I hope to reach my voice.
I hope to reach my voice and the other prisoners here behind closed doors to the whole world, he says.
The whole world.
Ahmed Jaffer Muhammad Ali is facing the worst possible consequence of an abusive red notice. He was extradited. Ahmed is a labor activist and a pro-democracy figure. Bahrain tried to throw the book at him. He spent time in detention and was tortured. Eventually, he fled. In 2013, Ahmed was charged with terrorism offences relating to the killing of an Emirati police officer in Bahrain. Ahmed wasn't even in the country when this happened. Nevertheless, he was convicted in absentia in a mass trial.
He got life imprisonment. The others got death sentences. And here you go. You get a life sentence in Bahrain like you get a parking ticket.
Ahmed's torture during his previous detention in Bahrain was detailed in a report by Human Rights Watch.
To my knowledge, the Human Rights Watch is one of the most renowned human rights organizations in the entire world, and their reports would be highly publicized. Anyone with ability to conduct Google research would be able to type the name of that individuals, and those reports will pop up. This is what you would think about your diligence process to take place. I do think that there was a clear failure by the Interpol to conduct its job. Whatever they're doing, whatever they're claiming, that is all rubbish.
By 2021, after years of bouncing from place to place, Ahmed was trying to get into Europe to claim asylum. But on the 3rd of November that year, he was arrested in Serbia on a red notice.
There was no whatsoever communication from him, so he was not able to communicate with his family, to call anyone, to inform anyone that he was arrested. But it was this time where we were able to communicate with a Serbian lawyer. It was Thursday, I remember, where we were able to compile every single publicly available reference which cite Ahmed, including the report by Human Rights Watch, which detailed the abuses he was subjected to. The trials which delivered his life sentences are like internationally condemned, including by the UN.
Let's break it down. Ahmed was arrested on a red notice by a country already known to use the system to target its dissidents. He was mentioned by name as a victim of torture in a Human Rights Watch report. He was also convicted in absentia in a mass trial, which was condemned by the UN. So how did he still get a red notice? Interpol told us that Ahmed's red notice was issued before Jägenstock's 2016 reforms, and that the General Secretariat was not informed of his eventual arrest. But Jägenstock also told me that after his reforms, the NDTF was going back and checking existing notices too. Surely a notice like Ahmed's should have been a priority. What came next was even more shocking. In January 2022, Ahmed was in a prison in Belgrade. He'd claimed asylum, and his Serbian lawyer had petitioned the European Court of Human Rights to prevent him from being sent back to Bahrain. The court made an interim ruling that Ahmed shouldn't be extradited. That was on Friday. But at 4 a.m. the following Monday, Ahmed is bundled into a private jet and flown from Belgrade directly to Bahrain. The plane is owned by Royal Jet, a private airline from the UAE used by the royal family. The now president of Interpol, Nasser al-Raisi, the one that Said and the Bahraini exile community had come to fear, he was the one who, 10 years ago, as the interior minister, set up a deal for Royal Jet to assist the UAE police.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to see someone, a Bahraini dissident, to be extradited because of red notice wrongly applied on him, to see then that the Interpol is now led by an Emirati official, and at the same time you see an Emirati royal jet is used to extradite him. You would think, and the question about up to what extent is the head of Interpol, al-Raisi, was aware of this? Is he... These are all legitimate questions to ask. Did he play a role in this?
The government of the UAE was asked to comment about the details of Ahmed's extradition. So was the government of Bahrain. They haven't responded. Interpol told us that its president has no influence on either red notices or the extraditions that might result from them. Serbia says that Ahmed's extradition didn't violate the ruling of the European Court because they only found out about it after he was already on the plane. Ahmed is now trapped in a prison cell in Bahrain, serving a life sentence.
This is the guy which is going to likely to spend the rest of his time behind bars. These are the prisons in Bahrain are not a joke, are like really one of the most notorious prisons. You could be subjected to assault, to torture, all sorts of abuse you would be subjected to. And regrettably, Ahmed is living all of this.
Ahmed is allowed to use a phone every so often, and there is a list of 5 people he's allowed to call. Family only. His sister then dials Said and merges the call so he can join. He recorded this brief call for us.
كلش تمام ايه بعد اخر مره بتبعينها بالصوت يكون واضح عدل يعني على اساس يكون عندي ريكوردينج قوي.
Because of Interpol, my life is destroyed and I'm serving more than 60 years in the jail with very bad situation.
Is it how bad is the prison you are in?
I'm isolated now and they put me in the place against my classification with and everything are forbidden. They prevent me all my life.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you.
After really ending the calls with him, it's always the feeling of seeing like not only like whether this guy is gonna just like make it out of a prison. You got him. I would say the state of Bahrain got him they punished him. He is placed, locked in a prison.
Saeed and Ahmed hold Interpol responsible. And the one question they keep asking, and I keep asking, is how could this happen?
And I want them to hear directly about the suffering Ahmed is being subjected to in Bahrain prisons, and whether there are more dissidents on their list. Because unless someone who is from the top management of the Interpol is going to be held into account, we're going to see more of these abuses. We're going to see more of individuals. As I said, like now we live this nightmare about if we are outside the UK, would it mean that we could be subjected to this red notice?
There were some upsetting scenes in this episode. If you're feeling emotionally distressed or suicidal, then please call Samaritans for help. You can reach them on 116-123 or email joe@samaritans.org in the UK. If you're in the US, call the Samaritans branch in your area or dial 1-800-273-TALK. We're taking a break for a couple of weeks. But when we return, the role of America, Interpol's funding arrangements, and its president. We continue to hear from people who've been impacted by the Red Notice system. If you or someone you know has ended up on the wrong end of a Red Notice and would like to talk, please send us an email to skynewspodcasts@sky.uk. Or if it's easier, just find me on Twitter @SaharZand. Finally, if you're worried that there could be an Interpol notice out for you and want to find out, just go to www.interpol.int for more information.
A postscript from the producers. After we finished recording this episode, the Chinese embassy in the UK emailed us a short statement. It didn't comment on Idris Hassan's case or respond to the description of China's use of red notices, but did say China complies with international laws and the Interpol Constitution.